Hello Fast Fam, thanks for tuning in. I'm Craig Lieberman and I've been tinkering on cars since 1980. I've owned more than 40 cars in my life. Some were heroes, some were zeros. But never in my wildest dreams would I ever guess that 3 of my cars would go on to star in a motion picture franchise. My Supra, my GTR, and my Maxima all had starring roles in Universal's Fast and Furious movies. Over the next 3 years, I'd served Universal as a technical advisor. I helped choose the cars, procure the parts, oversee their builds, and support both production and post-production. I have some cool stories to tell about what it was like to build these cars and to work with the cast. I was there, on set, in the production meetings, working on cars, hanging with the actors, and consulting on post-production. So follow along as I tell the stories. Let's jump in. Well, hello everybody. Hope you're doing well today. Today I'm going to talk about Letty's 240SX. I did a video on this car about 4 years ago, but more information has come to light, and most importantly, we now know the final fates of each of the 240SXs that we used. But first, just a few words about how this car was chosen. Back when we were casting cars for the first Fast and Furious movie, RJ De Vera and I were tasked with coming up recommendations for each character. So which car would fit the characters, each one? Having a 240SX in a movie about the tuner scene was an obvious choice, of course, but where do you find an owner of one of these cars who would agree to loan us a car for the production? Back then, Facebook didn't exist. There was no YouTube, there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok and Snapchat. So how do you do that? The only way to reach car owners on the internet back then was the automotive forums. Forums like Beamer Forumer, if you were looking for a BMW. If you're looking for a Supra, you go to mark4.com. And then if you're looking for 240SXs, you probably go to a site like Nissan Forums or Zilvia.net, and that's what we did. That story is coming up right after the break. Have you ever Googled your name? If you have, you were probably shocked to see some of your personal information floating around for the whole world to see. Every once in a while, I Google myself just for fun. I'm always surprised what kind of things are floating around the internet. It's just creepy that these companies have this information on me. So this is what they do. These data brokers are making money hand over fist by selling your info to robocallers, spammers, and in some cases, much worse. This is why I'm talking about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can identify data brokers who are exposing your information and then submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do that. So let Aura handle all of it for you. Now you can get off of all of those lists. You can try Aura free for 2 weeks using my link here below, aura.com/Craig. Aura does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats that you can't even see. It's really easy to set up, so you don't have to bother downloading several different apps just to get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft, insurance, and even more. You get everything at one affordable price. So let Aura do all the hard work of keeping you safe online so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. So finding a suitable 240SX, we had to reach out to friends and friends and friends and spread the word on the internet. Thankfully, between RJ De Vera and I, we had enough connections to spread the word, and we soon found a silver 240SX owned by a guy by the name of James Yen. The car was pretty sleek and tastefully modified. James agreed to rent to the car the production for $6,400. This car would be the Hero 1 car. After the director Ron Cohen accepted the car, he wanted to spice it up more and make it more aggressive. So, and that's basically what he did with all the cars. A Zeal body kit was presented for Rob's review, and he said, yep, go for it, let's do it. We found the body kit, and we put it on the car, and we were good to go. We also would need 2 stunt cars, so we purchased 2 more 240s. One was an automatic that was red and cost us about $11,000 and change. We found another one, a blue car. We paid about $10,600 for that car. The Hero 1 at the time had an SR20 and that was making almost 400 horsepower, if he was telling the truth. So in my last video, I made the mistake of saying that Helen Jasmine Cho own the car. Well, she did own the car, but she owned it after James and after Fast and Furious. James's car was Mercedes Silver when we rented the car. The director of photography, Eric Singor, had a vision of what he wanted. He saw the car as being going to be magenta. That's what he had in mind. He wanted magenta because he knew he was going to be using a warming filter, like an orange filter. If you know anything about photographers, used to have glass lenses, their filters, it makes it look like sunset. In fact, I saw a document at one point saying they were going to be using House of Color, Wild Cherry, paint code HOK UK03-QT. And so at some point they were seriously considering making that car magenta, but it did not happen. The art department wanted it to be a purple car, but being on set and not looking through a lens, the car looked purple to me, you know, but when I saw the movie in the theater, the car looked magenta and it didn't even look purple at all. But I saw the car on the set 3 or 4 times and I was like, what's going on? And then I realized, you know, that they're going to do color grading. And so for years, it was a mystery. Was the car really a magenta or was it really purple? So I found this picture about 2 years ago. Here's a picture taken by a spectator. We now know definitively that the car was painted a purple hue. Don't have the paint code and I'm not going to speculate, so don't ask me for it. Case closed on that. Let's move on. Well, the 240SX got a decent amount of screen time. Its big moment came at Race Wars. The script matched Letty's 240 against a character called Reggae Racer. A little Easter egg for you. While the cars were going through the line to get to the front and they're talking about with the money, you noticed that it was very quiet. Neither the 240 nor their RX-7 had their engines running as they slowly advanced through the line. The engines were just too loud to pick up the dialogue, so a couple of helpers slowly pushed the cars through the line until they get to the starting line. For those who wonder who would have won in reality, it would have been a close race. Both cars weighed about 2,800 pounds. The RX-7 was making about 305 horsepower, and the 240SX made about 400 horsepower. I think the 240SX would wipe the floor with the RX-7, but we'll never know because they never did it. Both were on street tires, so you can argue that all day. Now, of course, I'm referring to the Hero 1 because that's the only car that had the SR20, which made the 400 horsepower. But if you were being honest and you were in one of the stunt cars, which were only making like 200 horsepower, the RX-7 would have wiped the floor with those cars. Anyway, my money was on the 240SX. After all, it's just a movie. If you were paying attention during the race, the 240 sounded suspiciously like a 2JZ. That's because the sound design editors used the soundtrack of one of the 2 Supers that we recorded in post-production. And for those who are wondering, they used the Stunt 1 car for Race Wars. Though this car was stock, this was the car that had the fake nitrous system on it. You remember she presses the button on the steering wheel? That was a fake system, of course, because it doesn't need to be accurate. It doesn't need to be on the car. It's just a movie. So if anybody asks you which car is that, Stunt 1, Stunt 2, is it the Hero 1? That question has now been answered. Take notes, kiddies. So what happened to these cars after the first movie? The stunt cars, identified by the key list as number 25 and number 26, were sent to a storage facility in Santa Clarita about a year after the movie. Then in spring of 2002, Universal started pre-production on Too Fast, Too Furious. When these cars were deemed useful, both of these cars would be reused in Too Fast and Furious. Let me tell you how. They were sent to the picture car warehouse in Miami. Once again, I was tasked with overseeing refurbishment of the cars and changing a little few things to give them facelifts, all that kind of stuff. And once they arrived in Florida, they were put to work right away. Stunt 1, key list number 25, was the car that served as Letty's Stunt 1 car in the first film. This car was chosen to be reused as a warehouse scramble car. It was repainted in an orange rust color. It was then used for the driving school for some of the cast. Devin Aoki spent a lot of time in this car. She was learning how to drive a stick shift, so that was a fun thing. After Too Fast and Furious completed production, stunt car number 1 was sold to a guy in South Carolina. He hung on to it for many years because he knew it was a movie car, and that was down there in South Carolina for many years. He hung on to it for many years until he sold it to the Furious Garage owned by Gabriel Tremblay. He still has that car right now, and he's going to be doing a refurbish on the car, so stay tuned for that. As for Stunt 2, key list number 26, this car was painted blue and used in the warehouse scramble scene 2. After Too Fast, Too Furious, it also ended up with the same guy in South Carolina. That car changed hands a couple of times before it found its way to Indiana, and then it changed hands a few more times before it ended up in Florida as part of the Furious Garage, again owned by Gabriel Tremblay. This car is currently being restored to perfection. But of course you want to know what happened to the Hero 1 car. So here's what happened. After After the first movie, the car was returned to James Yen, who promptly painted back to silver. And once it was silver again, the car received several magazine spreads, including Super Street and I think Import Tuner. So it got a lot of press, and then he was just kind of done with the car. He held on the car for a while, and then he sold it to Helen Jasmine Cho. At one point, a friend of mine, by coincidence, started dating Helen way back then. When he met her, she told my friend that she owned the Letty 240SX, as my friend was like, oh yeah, sure. My friend, who is an avid JDM car guy, was skeptical, so he went to examine the car. He pulled some of the carpet back on the rocker panel, and he looked down at it, yep, and the purple paint was there. He identified it as the Hero 1 car. It was no big deal back then because nobody really cared about the movie cars back then in 2009. Because it was a movie car, the car went to many car shows and sold several times. By 2009, most Americans in the JDM scene had turned their backs on the Fast franchise, mostly because the movies were getting a little irrelevant to the car hobby. And in 2009, a new owner bought the car and decided to strip the car, taking the transmission, the SR20, the suspension, and all the performance equipment. Left with nothing but a shell, he sold the chassis to a junkyard. And so, the car was turned into a beer can. He knew this was a movie car, but nobody cared about that time. The good Fast and Furious movies were gone, replaced by Mission Impossible style action films. So most people just said, oh, well, that's ancient history, forget about it. It's just a car, doesn't mean anything. It was a fun story. Yeah, it was a Fast and Furious car, crush it. And that was the end of that. Just another car lost to the junk pile. The reason some of these cars from the first few movies are missing is because after Tokyo Drift, many fans of Japanese tuner cars started to lose interest in the Fast movies. There was too many Dodge Chargers, too few tuner cars, and plots that don't have really anything to do with the car hobby at all. You'd see a car come on the screen, and in less than 30 seconds, the car disappears or it gets destroyed. How do you get attached to that car? Today, the Fast movies are stuffed with assault vehicles rather than sports cars. And it's a shame because some of the cars that Dennis McCarthy and his team built are some amazing machines, only to get a few seconds of screen time. And it's really frustrating for me as an audience. You look at these cars and let me want to see it, and get close with it. I don't know what's going to happen. But so here's a little advice. If you see vehicles from many of these movies coming up for sale, you should consider buying them if you can afford it and stuff them away, because in a few years, these cars are going to be worth big money. 6 digits, 7 digits, you'll see. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and like it because it helps with YouTube's algorithm. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.